This is kind of where we left off yesterday, to avoid counting things multiple times. To measure aggregate output, or GDP, as we can use those terms interchangeably, all goods and services produced in a particular year must be counted once and only once. So, because most products go through a series of production stages before the final product is ready, I think I give the example of a car. Like you have all those different parts that are being produced, but in the end, you have the car, right? So the car is the final good, that's the only thing that would be counted. Okay, so we're ignoring intermediate goods when we're calculating it. So an intermediate good, those are goods and services that are purchased for resale or further processing or manufacturing. So it's basically anything that's not the done deal product that you're going to be presenting to the public. So goods and services that are purchased for resale or for further processing or manufacturing. So what would be an example of an intermediate good? Sure. You can use string for making other products, or it could be included in other products. What else? No?
Steel or maybe?
Yeah, because what can you do with a piece of steel? Well, you can use it to make
Tar.
other things, right? Paige, do you have your hand up?
Well, I was thinking, I guess a smaller, like if I was gonna make a cake,
Mm-hmm.
could like the milk and the eggs be intermediate goods because they're going in to make the final product?
Yeah, and you'll see that in the way we calculate this. Yeah.
So like, but if the good doesn't change, like if I'm gonna have a lemonade stand, is the lemonade an intermediate good, but it doesn't change
Or the else, what else would it
or not the actual lemonade?
be? The lemonade itself would be the final good. The lemons used to make the lemonade would be the intermediate good.
Could, like, you know how there's, like, mattress warehouses, you know, that, like, buy the certain mattresses and then, like, resell it, or, like, sofas or stuff like that, would that be an intermediate good as well? Because they're buying and then they're reselling.
Yeah, because when that resale is taking place, you're taking into account all of the expenses along the way. So that's included in that final price. So instead of counting each thing individually, and then again with the final good, you just take that final good and look back to see how much was, like how many expenses you incurred on the way to the final product. And like I said, there's an example, I think it's on the next slide. So final goods are goods and services that are purchased for final use by the consumer, not for resale or further processing or manufacturing. So there's no more parts being added, it's a complete package ready for consumers. What would be an example? Strawberries? That's true. Lemonade. Yeah, cars, a built house. Some of the intermediate goods for a house would be the wood, the nails, screws. I don't know what houses, so I don't know what else goes into it, but all of those would be intermediate goods, and then the final package would be the house that you purchase. The value of final goods already includes the value of all the intermediate goods that were used in producing them. If we were to include the intermediate goods when calculating GDP, we would count some things twice. So that's why we're only looking at the final goods. Okay, and I guess I didn't include the example. Nope. Okay, so because you guys have like 100 tests today, I wanted to keep today light because I figured your mental capacity, it's going in one ear and out the other, right? You have no more brain cells left for econ today. So, okay, well, rest your brain. These are econ videos. We're just gonna watch them. They're kind of entertaining. Okay, so I figure after the break, enough for you anyway, what we've just gone over today, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like My senior year's
so
been so much
helpful.
easier than last year.
This will help me
Do you
to
feel that way?
project
Yeah.
Okay, so this
Like,
is,
it's so much lighter.
this is a guy who makes econ movies, so he takes a movie and applies economics within it. So this one is dealing with GDP, recession, and fiscal policy. Right now, we're talking about GDP, so, and also a little bit about recession. Fiscal policy, hopefully we'll get to after break, but, go ahead, like, just, don't forget to hear, even though we're not quite there. And,
There's one for Indiana Jones.
yeah, we're gonna watch that one next.
Yes.
Or no, not Indiana, sorry, we're gonna,
Well,
well,
it was supposed to say
what?
physical.
Oh my god, there's one for Monsters Inc. too.
Get it out.
Hey, how you doing, econ students? This is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to Econ Movies. Today we're going to look at the economics in the movie Cars. A study of economics can be broken into two parts. First is microeconomics. It studies individuals, businesses, and markets up close. The second part is macroeconomics, which studies the big picture, the entire economy as a whole. Macroeconomists look at things like spending, unemployment, and inflation to find out if we have a healthy economy. Now, the economy is kind of like a car. For example, some cars can go fast.
I'm a precision instrument of speed and aerodynamics.
The economies of the world's developed countries can produce huge amounts of goods and services because they have the world's best engines. They've got the capital, the factories, machines, and equipment that result in high productivity. Now, other cars are slow.
I'm a precision instrument of speed and aerodynamics.
Less developed countries have slower economies because they have less capital, political instability, fewer free markets, or just a broken economic system. In the movie, Lightning McQueen's goal is to win the Piston Cup.
What is cup?
Although some countries are in the race to have the world's fastest economy, it's not really a race. Instead, the goal of every economy is to do each lap a little faster. If an economy is improving and going faster each year, then it's experiencing something called economic growth. The most important measure of a country's economy is something called GDP, or gross domestic product. GDP is the dollar value of all the final goods and services produced in the country in 1 year. It includes goods like Rusty's bumper ointment.
Lightning McQueen here, and I need a Rusty's medicated bump ointment, new rear end formula.
But it also includes services like a paint job.
Ramon will paint you up right.
Just like how a 4-cylinder car gets its power from 4 pistons, each economy gets its power from 4 components that make up GDP. Economists have given each one a letter. The first component of GDP is consumer spending. This is spending on things like food and clothes and tires.
Oh, new tires.
Consumer spending is the largest and most important part of GDP, so customers are a big deal.
Customers, everyone! Customers! Okay, all right, everybody calm down. It's been a long time. Just remember what we rehearsed. All right, nobody panics. Here we go.
The second part of GDP is investment. This is spending by businesses on equipment and machinery or other things to improve their business. The next part of GDP is government spending, which is spending on things like national defense, the police, and fire trucks. The last part of GDP is called net exports. It's the value of all the exports we sell to other countries, minus the value of all the imports we buy from them.
Lightning McQueen told me this was the best place in the world to get tires. How about setting me and my friends up with 3 or 4 sets each? This is the most glorious day of my life. Wow. Spero che il tuo amico se riprenda. Mi dicono che siete fantastici.
Added all together, the spending by these 4 groups, consumers, businesses, the government, and other countries, determines how much we can produce in a year, the GDP. Okay, we're not done. Time has proven that every economy goes through periods when it's either speeding up or it's slowing down. The idea that a country's GDP goes up and down over time is called the business cycle. And expansion is the good times when the economy is moving fast. There's a lot of consumer spending, low unemployment, and there's a high standard of living. GDP is on the rise, and there's economic growth. A recession is the bad times, when the economy slows down and there's high unemployment. Remember, a huge part of the economy is consumer spending, and when consumers stop spending, businesses have to close.
I want to sell any tires. I will lose everything.
When these businesses close, the workers are fired, and now they have lower incomes, and so they spend less. This causes other businesses to close, and the economy gets even worse. If it gets really, really bad, it becomes a depression. That is when the whole economy just crashes. Now Now, these economic downturns are scary. That's why the government often steps in to help speed up the economy. They can either increase government spending or they can cut taxes. This is called fiscal policy. An example of fiscal policy is when the government tries to speed up the economy by increasing public works programs like fixing roads.
This here is Bessie, the finest road paving machine ever built. You're gonna fix the road under my supervision.
Fiscal policy is done by politicians, so whether we should cut taxes or increase government spending is one of the many things that conservatives and liberals fight about.
Will you turn that disrespect? Respect the classics, man.
Eventually, the good times will return and there'll be an expansion.
They fixed their neon.
But eventually, there'll be another recession. That's just the business cycle. So the economy is kind of like a car, but it's not on a flat racetrack. It's on an endless highway that continually goes up and down over time.
Oh my gosh.
We're gonna watch that one next because it's really cool. So, is it making a little more sense now that they've applied it to cars? Okay. See, it's not so bad. Indiana Jones Not Today. You guys can, if you have access to YouTube at home, just type in Econ Movie, all one word, and it'll come up. Got that, Goodman? Econ Movie.
I'll teach that to Jack the next time we watch Cars.
I just look at you and
Get it
say,
done
"Mom,
with
what are you
his
talking about?"
Okay, so Back to the Future is talking about nominal versus real unemployment and inflation, which hopefully we'll get to after break as well.
Hey, how you doing, Econ students? This is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to Econ Movies. Today we're going to look at the economics in the movie Back to the Future. In this movie, Marty McFly travels through time to visit 1955, 1985, and 2015.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
And the more things change, the more things stay the same.
What are you looking at, butthead? What are you looking at, butthead? Must be rough being named after a complete butthead.
Economic history in 1955 was very similar to 1985. Now, before we go any further, keep in mind that every economy has three goals. They want to grow over time, they want to keep unemployment down, and they want to keep prices stable. So let's look at the U.S. economy back in 1955. 1955 was a great year for the U.S. economy. There was growth, prosperity, and a 7% increase in gross domestic product. But don't assume that everything was perfect. Remember, the GDP only shows how the economy is doing. It doesn't tell us anything about other important issues like racial equality, which sucked back then.
Mayor! Now that's a good idea. I could run for mayor.
A colored mayor, that'll be the day.
Well, what about 1985?
I was in high school.
The U.S. economy in 1985 was also going super strong and recovering from a recession. The GDP growth rate was about 4%. But the problem was the clothing.
Yes, it
Tucking in
was.
your shirt, in your jeans, with suspenders.
And the big hair.
The nominal GDP in 1955 was $415 billion. But there's a problem with looking at big numbers. They don't make any sense out of context.
21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts!
So giant numbers don't really make sense until you start comparing things. So let's try that again. The nominal GDP of 1955 was $415 billion. Compare that to the nominal GDP of 1985, which was $4.2 trillion. Wow, the US economy grew 10 times bigger in 30 years? No. The nominal GDP is not adjusted for inflation. Since prices were lower back in 1955, the value of all the goods and services produced, the nominal GDP, was also lower. For example, the price of a movie ticket back in 1955 was only 50 cents. In 1985, it was $3.50. The point is, the nominal GDP in 1955 is going to be lower because prices were lower. To see if we really produce more stuff between different years, we have to adjust for inflation and look at real GDP. So let's try that again. Using base year 2009 prices, the real GDP of 1955 was $2.78 trillion. Compare that to $7.7 trillion in 1985. So, adjusting for inflation, the economy got 3 times bigger, not 10 times bigger. But what about unemployment? 1955 had a super low unemployment rate of about 4%. People that were willing and able to work were able to get jobs. Now you're probably thinking 4% is not that low, it's still way higher than 0%. But don't forget that the natural rate of unemployment in the United States is somewhere between 4 to 6% unemployment.
English, Doc.
Allow me to explain. There's 3 types of unemployment: frictional, structural, and cyclical. The first one, frictional unemployment, is the idea of being between jobs. These are workers that are just entering the labor force, workers that are switching to different jobs, or people who get fired.
No, I cannot be fired. I'm fired.
The second one is called structural unemployment. This is the idea that some skills and jobs become obsolete and there's no more demand for that kind of labor. An example would be when workers are replaced by technology and robots. The last one is called cyclical unemployment, and this is unemployment that's caused by a recession. So if someone lost their job because the economy tanked, that's cyclical unemployment.
Mr. Strickland, it's me, sir. It's Mike. Do you remember you gave me detention last week? The school burnt down 6 years ago.
The first 2 types are unavoidable. Every economy is going to have frictional and structural unemployment. So the goal is not to have 0%. In fact, an economy is at full employment when we have 4 to 6% unemployment. That's called the natural rate of unemployment. Now, what about inflation? 1955 had super low inflation. It was like less than 1%. 1985 had higher inflation, about 4%, but that's way better than the stagflation of the late 1970s. An oil crisis in the 1970s caused super high prices at the same time as a stagnant, slow economy. This is called stagflation. So there's a reason why Doc and Marty wouldn't want to go back to 1975. Now let's look at 2015. Obviously the movie got a few things wrong about the future, like flying cars and hoverboards and the newspaper industry. What's a newspaper? And also the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series.
Wait a minute. Cubs won World Series.
Sorry, Mr. Duffer. Wait, let's go back and look at that newspaper. If you zoom in, you'll notice something that would definitely affect our economy. 3 billion readers every day, our GDP per capita would just plummet. That's our GDP divided by our population. Instead of being ranked around the 15th in the world like we are now, we'd be somewhere around the 100th. In the end, it's the job of economists to look at all the different indicators, like GDP growth, unemployment, and the inflation rate, to find out how the economy is doing and see what it all means.
It means your future hasn't been written yet. No one has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one.
I didn't watch it, so I'm not sure. I've seen Anchorman and I thought it was an inappropriate movie.
Yeah.
But of course, I think we accidentally grabbed the unrated version. So not that one today, because I haven't previewed it. But
That's the one for Batman.
where's Batman?
So right there on the playlist.
The third one to the right.
Oh yeah.
The Joker.
Oh yeah, I did watch that one. I guess we can move on. Okay, so just to kind of recap, so the nominal GDP doesn't take into consideration inflation, so it's different than the real GDP, which is taking into account that prices today aren't the same as they were in a year that we're comparing. And then the other thing, the unemployment, we've kind of touched on that a few times, but as he was saying, like the normal rate is like 4 to 6%, so it's natural to have unemployment. How much time do we have? Okay, I think we have time for one. Any questions on either of those? Marty?
So the difference between the GDPs, right, is the nominal and then the real?
Yeah, and then there's also potential GDP as well.
But how do they calculate the real GDP, since it's like different? Will we get to that? Okay.
I mean, do you wanna go over it today? Pages like that. Okay, so, I don't remember what this one talks about, but it's econ related.
Look at the first one.
Isn't it?
Students, this is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to Econ Movies. Today we're going to look at the economics in Batman. Look at The Dark Knight. This movie actually has some great economic advice.
If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Now we're still talking about microeconomics, and this time we're going to talk about oligopolies. An oligopoly is when an industry is controlled by a few large producers. For example, the wireless cell phone market in the United States is controlled by 4 main firms: Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. Competition between these firms keeps prices down, but what if they got together to set prices high so they could all make more profit? This is called collusion. Now this is illegal in the United States, and so there's 2 words to describe collusion.
Unethical?
Firms in the oligopoly are interdependent. This means that their decisions will directly affect their competitors, so they have to be aware of how their competitors will respond. So to maximize profit, these firms have to use game theory, which is the study of strategy. This movie includes a great but rather violent example of game theory.
We won't actually talk about game theory, but...
I'm ready right now to blow you all sky high. If anyone attempts to get off their boat, you all die. Each of you has a remote. Blow up the other boat. If, however, one of you presses the button, I'll let that boat live. So, who's gonna be?
Just in case you haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert. Let's talk about the classic example of game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. Assume 2 people were arrested, charged with a crime, and put in 2 different cells.
Oh, my head. Oh, everything's fuzzy. Ow! Who punches a hand?
Prisoner 1 and prisoner 2 have 2 choices. They can either deny or they can confess to the crime. This means that there's only 4 possible outcomes that can occur. If they both deny, there's enough evidence to put them in jail for 10 years each. When reading these things, the numbers on the left are prisoner 1 and the numbers on the right are prisoner 2. I color-coded them to help you better see this. If they both confess to the crime, they're both going to go to jail for 20 years. But if prisoner 1 confesses and prisoner 2 denies, prisoner 1 is basically going to rat out prisoner 2. And so prisoner 1 is going to go free, and prisoner 2 is going to go to jail for 30 years. Now over here, if prisoner 1 denies and prisoner 2 confesses, prisoner 2 goes home free, and prisoner 1 goes to jail for 30 years. So what are they going to choose? Well, that's the point of game theory. Before you can make a choice, you have to keep in mind what the other person's going to do. Now this is a good way to introduce the idea of game theory, but let's look at a better example that has firms and profits. As you probably know, Batman started as a comic book character. What you might not know is that the comic book industry today is an oligopoly. Marvel Comics has about 37% market shares, and DC Comics, the creators of Batman, have about 31% market shares. Like most oligopolies, the end product is sometimes very similar because they're trying to find what customers want and they steal ideas from each other. So think of the story of Batman. A handsome billionaire that drives fast cars and hangs out with beautiful women has a life-changing experience and inspires him to fight evil despite having no superpowers. So instead, he has to rely on gadgets and a special suit to fight terrorists. Aided by a trusted butler, he is betrayed by a mentor, defeats a bunch of bad guys, and becomes a beloved hero. The story sounds familiar. Anyways, since the video industry is an oligopoly that's controlled by a few large firms, they have to use game theory. So let's say that DC Comics and Marvel Comics are deciding whether or not they should make a new comic book series covering the backstories of famous butlers or villains. DC is deciding whether they should have a series about Alfred or a series about Joker.
A long time ago,
Yes.
I was in Burma, my friends and I were working for the local government.
Marvel is deciding between making a comic book about Jarvis or the Mandarin. Assume each company can make either one or the other, and so the result is this game theory matrix. This shows the profit that each firm would get in each of these different situations. Let's just keep it simple by having really low numbers. To verify that you know how to read this thing, let me ask you a quick question. If DC decides to make a comic book about Alfred, and Marvel does one about the Mandarin, how much profit will Marvel get? The answer is $200. Now that you can read the chart, let's talk about something called a dominant strategy. If you have a dominant strategy, that means you should make that choice no matter what. In other words, it doesn't matter what the other person does, you should definitely choose that option. So let's see if DC has a dominant strategy. Now, if Marvel decides to go with Jarvis, DC can choose between doing Alfred and getting $100, or going with Joker and getting $500. Which one would DC rather have? Well, they'd rather have $500, and so they're going to do a comic book about the Joker. If Marvel chooses the Mandarin, again, DC would choose to do a comic book about the Joker. That means that that option is their dominant strategy. With these numbers, there's no reason for them ever to make a comic book about Alfred. Sorry, Alfred. Now let's see if Marvel has a dominant strategy. If DC chooses Alfred, Marvel can choose between doing a comic book about Jarvis and getting $300, or doing one about Mandarin and getting $200. Marvel would choose Jarvis. If DC chooses the Joker, Marvel can choose between doing Jarvis and getting $50, or doing a comic book about the Mandarin and getting $300. They would choose the Mandarin. So depending on what DC chooses, Marvel might choose Jarvis, or they might choose the Mandarin. This means they do not have a dominant strategy. Now, if this was realistic, and the firms did have all this perfect information, where would the firms end up? Well, DC would obviously choose the Joker, because that's their dominant strategy. And Marvel would choose to do the Mandarin, because that will give them the most profit. This is the idea of something called a Nash equilibrium. It's the end result that we'll be at when each firm makes choices to maximize their own profit, but also keeps in mind what the other firm is going to do. Reading a game theory matrix and finding the different dominant strategies will take time and practice, so be patient. Dominant strategies are not that hard to find. Seriously, just calm down, look at the game theory matrix, and you'll figure it out. Seriously, dude, just relax.